vanishing city of Luanjing. Luanjing, a jewel of trade and culture, stood in the heart of the Gobi Desert. Love, betrayal, and a curse sealed its fate. Returning from the Central Plains, King Li Wei was ambushed by bandits. Their leader, Mei Ling, was fierce yet sorrowful. Despite their enmity, they fell in love. Defying tradition, Li Wei made her queen. Their happiness was brief. Li Wei died young, and Mei Ling, struggling to rule, turned to raiding the empire. Prime Minister Ming sent an army to besiege the city. Amid the chaos, a wizard, Lao Shen, cast a curse. Luanjing would vanish into the sands, reappearing once every 60 years, a haunting echo of its past. The sun spills its lifeblood over Luanjing, gilding its spires in molten fire, as if the heavens themselves weep gold upon a city that dares to reach for forgotten gods. Below, the streets pulse like a living artery, a jeweled mirage adrift in an ocean of restless sands. Silken banners unfurl like whispered prayers upon the wind, merchants spin their voices into a symphony of 100 tongues, and the air is thick with spice, ambition, and the unspoken weight of destiny. Yet beneath this splendor, beneath the ceaseless rhythm of trade, of secrets exchanged like coin, something stirs. A shadow unseen, a hand unfelt, weaving the unseen threads of fate into the tapestry of the world. The cursed city of Luanjing. Days later, the dunes unfurled like the tattered pages of a forgotten saga, revealing Luanjing, a gilded spectre adrift upon the horizon. Cloaked in the weary breath of the desert, Li Wei rode, his silhouette a fleeting echo against the sun's dying embers. Beneath him, his steed, a tempest bound in flesh and sinew, cut through the sands like a blade through silk, each stride carving a path between past and fate. The city loomed ahead, its towers aflame in the twilight, a beacon of home, reckoning, and debts yet to be paid. That night, beneath the crimson gaze of the blood moon, the desert was forged into a battlefield of fire and shadow. Torches guttered like dying stars, casting fleeting light upon warring silhouettes that danced like specters upon the dunes. Steel met steel, Li Wei's blade clashing against Mei Ling's in an eruption of sparks, a fleeting constellation in the dark. Their eyes locked, twin embers smoldering in the void, measuring fate in the breath between heartbeats. Around them, the world unraveled, sand churned beneath frantic feet, war cries lost to the wailing wind. Yet in that moment, nothing existed but the clash of swords and the unspoken promise hanging between them. As later, the desert wind carried the ghost of smoldering wood and seared iron, weaving through the wreckage of the fallen caravan. Embers glowed like dying stars, their light casting restless shadows over Li Wei and Mei Ling, two warriors, blooded but unbroken. He sat across from her, the fire's glow tracing the fresh wound along his jaw, his breath still steady, still tempered by battle. Mei Ling's fingers hovered over her wounds, but her gaze never wavered from his. Between them, the night stretched vast and unspoken, the frayed edges of hatred unraveling into something far more perilous. The silence was not empty. It pressed against them, thick as the desert air, heavy, unrelenting. And in its quiet weight, they knew that this war had bound them in ways neither had foreseen, in ways neither could yet name. A season later, the winds of change swept through the palace halls, stirring silk curtains like the restless ghosts of a vanquished age. Mei Ling stood upon the balcony, moonlight gilding the edges of her royal silks, no longer the tattered garb of a desert rebel, but the queen's regalia. And yet, at her waist, a blade remained, a silent promise, a wordless defiance against the courtiers who whispered from the shadows. Below, Luanjing stretched into the night, its golden spires burning like embers scattered upon the dark. This throne was not gifted by birthright, but taken, claimed with fire and steel, her name etched into the bones of history. The nobles watched, their patience a coiled serpent, waiting for the tremor of weakness, the falter of a step. Mei Ling gave them none. She was no mere ornament, no puppet to be adorned and controlled. She was the storm that had come to break the old world apart. And she would wear this crown not as a prize, but as a weapon. Weeks later, the air in the royal court grew heavy with unsaid truths, the scent of treachery clinging to silk like dust in an abandoned temple. Beneath the gilded lanterns, noblemen cast furtive glances, their whispered conspiracies slithering through the great hall like poison laced in wine. At the heart of it all, an old advisor knelt, his trembling hands pressed to the cold marble, breath shallow with the weight of judgment. Before him, half veiled in the flickering torchlight, stood a figure wreathed in shadow, power unseen, yet undeniable, the court still. Thick and suffocating silence held its breath. Mei Ling sat upon her throne, her gaze keen as a blade's edge, fingers resting lightly upon the hilt at her waist. She saw everything, the shifting allegiances, the whispered betrayals waiting to unfold like rot beneath gold leaf. Yet she did not stir. Let them whisper. Let them plot. She had carved her throne from the bones of the old world and would not yield it to ghosts in silk. Under the noonday sun, the desert howled with chaos. Hooves pounded the dunes, a dust storm rising in the raiders' wake. Bandits, veiled in tattered cloth, moved like phantoms and leaped onto merchant wagons ruthlessly, blades flashed, silver arcs through searing air. A scream, then silence. Blood mingled with the perfume of shattered spice. Silks meant for nobles lay trampled, coins spilling like fallen stars, snatched by greedy hands. Then came the fire. Wagons burned, wealth turning to cinder. The merchants fled, some swallowed by the dunes, others cut down. The bandits vanished, leaving only ruin in their wake. That night, in the dim glow of flickering candlelight, Prime Minister Ming stood unmoving, his shadow stretching long against the chamber walls. The air smelled of ink and molten wax, thick with the weight of what was to come. In his hands, the decree trembled, not from weakness, but from the gravity of the words carved into its surface. The Emperor's seal bled red as the wax cooled, final and unyielding, his jaw tightened. The raids had gone too far. Luanjing, once a jewel of the desert, had become a nest of vipers, its queen reckless, its people blind to the storm gathering beyond the dunes. With a slow breath, Ming turned to the waiting messenger. "Deliver this," he said, his voice steel. "The Empire does not forget." By dawn, the parchment would reach Mei Ling. Whether she would heed its warning, or let her kingdom burn, was now in her hands. At the edge of night, the first arrow soared, a streak of ember against the obsidian sky. It struck Luanjing's gates, and within moments, fire bloomed, devouring ancient wood with a hunger that could not be tamed. Beyond the walls, the Imperial army stood like an unbroken tide, banners snapping in the desert wind, crimson and gold against the dark. Steel-clad soldiers waited, their spears glinting beneath the moonlight. Siege engines groaned as flaming boulders arced through the air, shattering stone with thunderous force. From the battlements, Mei Ling watched in silence, warlight flickering across her face. Below, the city pulsed with panic, citizens fleeing, soldiers barking orders, smoke thick in the air. The Empire had come for its reckoning. Luanjing would not fall easily, but the night was long, and the flames had only begun to rise. Weeks into the siege, Luanjing was a city of whispers and hollowed eyes. The streets, once alive with merchants' clamor and children's laughter, had fallen into a hush, broken only by the shuffle of weary feet. Cracked water jars lay abandoned in the dust, their sun-bleached fragments a cruel echo of what was lost. On the steps of a shuttered tea-house, a mother clutched her child, rocking him gently, though no lullaby could quiet hunger. His ribs pressed against her trembling hands, his breath shallow, his eyes too tired to see. In the shadows, desperate figures moved like ghosts, searching for scraps, for hope, anything to hold on to. The once gilded city had become a prison, and the same unspoken question lingered in every hollow gaze: how much longer? On a night without wind, When even the fires of war seemed to hold their breath, a lone figure emerged from the dunes. His dark robes billowed despite the stillness, and the air around him bent, shimmered, whispered with unseen power. Before the palace gates, Lao Shen stood, a wanderer, a spectre, a force beyond the reckoning of kings and queens. He struck his staff against the earth, and the sands trembled in answer. The city, battered and starving, seemed to lean toward him, sensing something beyond salvation or ruin. On the battlements, wary guards gripped their spears, their voices swallowed by fear. His name had traveled through myths, the wandering sage, the bringer of curses. Mei Ling felt him before she saw him. A chill coiled in her bones, deep and unshakable. Fate had come knocking. As the first word left Lao Shen's lips, the heavens stirred. Dark as ink, clouds churned above Luanjing, writhing like vengeful spirits roused from slumber. The long silent wind howled to life, tearing through the city with merciless hunger. The golden towers, proud, unyielding, began to tremble. Cracks split their polished faces, veins of doom running deep through Luanjing's bones. One by one, they shattered, crumbling in thunderous ruin as the earth heaved beneath them. At the heart of it all, Mei Ling stood upon the palace steps, her silks whipping in the rising storm. "No!" she screamed, her voice raw. Her hands reached, whether to stop the falling spires or grasp at something already lost, she did not know. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sky stretched vast and empty, painted in hues of rose and gold, as if the heavens had already forgotten the city buried beneath the sands, where once Luanjing had stood, its golden spires piercing the sky, its streets alive with voices and trade. There was nothing. Only an ocean of shifting dunes, their rippling crests whispering secrets to the wind. No walls, no towers, no trace of the splendor that had ruled the desert for generations. A lone vulture circled overhead, gliding in the still morning air. The land was quiet now, save for the hush of the breeze carrying away the last echoes of a kingdom lost to time, and yet, beneath the weight of silence and years, the city waited. For the stars to realign. For the coast to stir once more. For the day Luanjing would rise again. 6 centuries later, beneath a moon like polished jade, the desert stirred with an impossible truth. A caravan halted atop the dunes, their horses restless, as Luanjing emerged from the sands, its golden towers gleaming, its walls untouched by time. There were no ruins, no decay, only a city frozen in the moment of its doom. The wind carried whispers through empty streets. Lanterns flickered where no hands lit them. A trembling scholar stepped forward, tracing a fingertip over ancient stone. Then, soft as drifting sand, the voices came, a king, a queen, a curse. Luanjing had returned. And it was waiting. Within the city walls, time lay undisturbed. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the golden glow of forgotten lanterns. Market stalls stood frozen, silks unfurled as if waiting for unseen hands, dried spices still clinging to their faded scent. The travelers moved cautiously, their footsteps swallowed by the hush. No birds, no wind, only the eerie stillness of a kingdom abandoned but not forgotten. Then, a whisper rose from the depths of an empty alley, not words, but the sigh of a city that remembered. Through the mist-laden alleys, a figure drifted, silent as shifting sand. The travelers froze, breath tight in their chests, as a crimson veil rippled like a phantom sigh, vanishing beyond the bend of a shadowed street. No footsteps. No rustle of silk. Only the whisper of the wind, laced with jasmine, rich and sweet, yet touched by something distant, something cold. The grand hall loomed in ghostly silence at the heart of the palace. Moonlight spilled through shattered lattice windows, casting fractured patterns upon dust-laden stone. Gold filigree, once radiant, lay dulled by time, and banners, their embroidered dragons faded, hung like forgotten prayers in the still air. Li Wei's throne stood empty at the chamber's end, lacquered wood cracked, its mighty dragons staring with hollow, sightless eyes. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen. Then, from the depths of the hole, a whisper rose, soft, familiar, woven from memory and longing. The silence did not feel empty. It felt waiting. The first voice was a whisper, faint, distant, carried on the hush of the wind. A lone survivor staggered through the empty streets, breath ragged, heart hammering. Lanterns flickered, their golden glow wavering as if caught between worlds. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting, reaching. Then, the whispers grew, soft murmurs swelled into hushed cries, echoes of a city that had not forgotten. Figures shimmered in the mist, merchants frozen mid-barter, nobles in silken robes, soldiers gripping spectral spears. A woman's laughter drifted light and distant, until it fractured into a wail. The survivor turned, but the streets had changed, the past was waking. And it would not let him leave. The wind howled as the traveler ran, his breath ragged, his pulse a drumbeat of terror. The gates of Luanjing loomed ahead, gleaming under the moonlight, yet they receded, pulling away as if the city itself refused to let him go. Behind him, voices swelled in a ghostly chorus, pleading, warning, calling. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, figures shifting in the mist, hollow eyes locked upon him. Sand churned beneath his feet, swallowing his steps, erasing all trace of his flight. With one final, desperate lunge, he reached for the gates. Just as the air shuddered, the ground trembled, and Luanjing began to fade. Was he free? Or had he merely become another whisper in the wind? By dawn, nothing remained. The golden towers, the whispering streets, the throne of a long-dead king, all swallowed once more by the endless sea of sand. The restless and eternal wind swept across the dunes, erasing the last traces of the city's return. And no ruins. No echoes. Only silence. Yet, as the wind carried grains of sand into the horizon, it held something else, a whisper, a memory, a story drifting into legend. And far beneath the dunes, Luanjing waited for the stars to call it again.